All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really, really excited to get to know you all a little bit better and know about the work that you're doing or what you want to do for those of you who are interns. And so that's where we're going to start today, just by introducing yourself and telling me, one 5-year goal, so that's considered medium term, and one short term goal. So that would be like, let's say, 1 year in the creative industries and surrounding areas. Who would like to go first? But you could give me a little bit of background, especially those who are from different enterprises. I'd love to know what you're working on. Yeah. Rita's gonna go. Yay. Thank you. Who'd like to go next? On the spot.
I mean, I guess career-wise, I'm not sure what my goal is. But with 5 years, I mean, I hope to maybe get our production company, maybe help the creative side of food.
Okay. So we're gonna let you think about your 1 year goal, and we're gonna come back around then and put you on the spot. Hmm. Yeah, that's why you have to put him on the spot. You remember that, I assure you. Okay, who'd like to go next? All the shy folks in the room. Yes, Yanni. Mhm. Mm. Mhm. Language and linguistics. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Thank you for sharing. Okay, I think this is the young table. So we're gonna have you guys go first. Come on.
search for jobs, and hopefully by then I will make some strong connections. Learned as much as I can. Have a very big portfolio, so then I bring it to companies with their open hiring. Yes.
Awesome, Lauren. Remind me what you're studying. Media studies. Well, those are great goals, actually, right? And networking is a strategic thing, and it's something that you can really master and do well at, and it can really position you. So those are great goals. Sounds simple, but they're great goals. So, thank you. Thank you for sharing.
So I'm my CNCF is the education assistant, so my goal is in a similar vein to do this. But if I sidestep slightly, I think maybe I would like to have finalized or put together a game plan that we want to put together for collection management. And CNCF has been like my passions lie, data as well.
Nice. Okay.
And then long term, I would say I haven't really got that far yet. I would just like to continue to get established in the role that I'm in, continue to develop, train, learn. I think becoming more familiar with the grants and the process. But within the year, for me personally, I would like to see that collections management plan established. And I have done my
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you, Megan. Thank you. And what I find really interesting with y'all is that y'all are all coming from different dimensions. You could form your own collective and be really powerful, right? Because you all have a different skill set. So think about that, right? That in terms of collaboration, those kinds of approaches are really, really important. Yeah. Awesome.
So I don't know if I take this background, multiple tasks, that an artist and arts advocate, board member of the National Museum. My full-time job is with Cambridge University, because organization, support all businesses. Here, we talk about that side of things, but we would like for 5 years, 5 years for everyone to kind of integrate over culture into their corporate businesses.
Ooh.
I know the concept of percent are like just 1% so like we just develop practices where everybody's just having each of their place.
That is really awesome. Yeah. It's really, really awesome. Yeah. Well, sorry, I didn't get your name. Caitlin. Okay.
And then 1 year old, it's just right now, I'm just trying to upload everything that I'm doing. But I really love the incubator program that we're working with the selection process and for also collaborations with international institutions that are doing good things. And we can kind of take a look at that and apply those practices and support community businesses.
Could you share what that incubator program is about?
It's an incubator program for businesses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's really broad right now.
Okay.
We're planning a design competition and it's an incubator type program to support finance and process for it. We're running for about 5 years, so we have over 50 board projects in the program. So really cool. And a lot, there's one this year that was arts related.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. That's really awesome. Okay.
And my 1-year-old
This is a smaller scale. We hosted this year in this studio space. So I really would like to see a lot more creatives through that program. The program actually that is $10,000. So it is a great opportunity for them. I think I mentioned we did part of this event, created a marketplace for individuals to sell their art. So I thought that that was a great first step in that direction, and I wonder if it's a bit more of that come through for next year. 5 years on. So for 5 years, ideally, I would like the community and wider community to be more familiar with the enterprise program. I think right now we're in the shallows and really understand what it is we do and the opportunities that we provide. So I really would like to see us become that information of the program for creatives and anyone with that tech background. I really would like to be able to help anybody that is from no matter what background they're coming from, whether that's design, training, or just allowing them a platform to share their knowledge and expertise.
And so when you say go regional, what do you mean exactly?
Sorry.
When you say go regional, what do you mean exactly?
Well, we have a lot of programs like the business and competition career program, all of our tech training courses that aren't available on some of the other items. We do open up our tech training programs are available to anyone. So if we have seen a few international sort of states come to our career program previously, so just getting that out there a bit more. That's an opportunity that's open and happening. Absolutely.
Hey, you should talk. All right, what did you say your name was? Alyssa. Sorry, I'm struggling to hear from here. And I'm sorry that I'm so high up. It's really just about the computer and getting that to work. Okay, awesome. Last but not least.
I'm Ashley. My current role is that I'm the production assistant here at CNCF. My short-term goal, I'm also an actor, I'm a working actor.
That's why she projects like that, can I tell you?
Yes, in dreams.
Yep. We can hear it.
Maybe someday.
No. Say yes. Say yes. Okay. Say yes. Call me. All right, Ashley. We have to have a conversation about that. Okay.
So my 1-year goal, I guess it's two. It's going to be related to, I'll do two pertaining to CNCF, but then my career as an artist, as an actor. My 1-year goal is pretty simple. It's just we continue doing the work that I'm doing with just my auditions and being able to support here, support different artists here, but then also to write a one-woman show. And that's really terrifying. So that's my 1-year goal, personally. But then within CNCF, I'm learning the admin side of theater making and also really figuring out how to be an advocate for other artists. I know how I like to be treated in a professional setting, and I also know what works well to help yield great performances. And not just great performances, but also great theater making. What also is the way in which we can sort of facilitate important conversations around what's happening in our community. And I'm a really big believer in that for myself personally, the work that I'm a part of, but I also want to be a part of how I can even facilitate that within that, because I think it's something that's already happening, but I want to be part of the team here that helps create structure around that, specifically as it pertains to theater. So my 1-year goal is really just learning. I'm learning as I'm in this role, and then also something that I can still be working after. My 5-year goal, I'll just say that from the acting side, I want to continue telling stories that showcase the human experience. Like, that's pretty big, but I'm trying to incorporate that with whatever I'm doing, whether it's project related or in the spaces that I occupy, and also hopefully stories that unify. Though I do like being part of storytelling. It's for underserved communities or voices that are not often heard. And I believe that can be part of sharing and stories on larger scales, but also not even on a larger scale, like just amongst each other with the different communities, and also our queer community, and that's not something that's often discussed always, and just like what my experience could be in that particular group, not as it defines me, but more just that that's an experience here, and how many other places are here who do not often get heard, or whose stories are not often showcased. So that's always there. But then as it pertains to CNCF and Maignan specifically, there's one to be part of a theater company here, hopefully in 5 years in a leadership position within what theater company Maignan looks like, bringing a more structured sense of theater making to Maignan and elevating the standard at which theater is made here in a way that encourages artists to come before me and what was already being done, and sort of taking that torch and also bringing it into a new chapter, both from a creative standpoint, which is the stories that you're telling us instead, whether it's supporting new writers and new works, and getting kids to even realize that they can do that, not just kids, but adults to realize that they can do that and there's a need for it, but also from the admin and structural side in terms of theater administration or production management, stage management, any of those structural positions that are essential to the entire world of theater making. So that's kind of
Yeah, you absolutely did. You absolutely did. So Ashley,
jumps around a lot, and if you feel like getting useful from this, please come back and let me know what I said.
so Ashley, I think you need to dig deeper into this exercise because I think you want to think about this more. And I said, I think you need to dig deeper into this exercise for yourself because I think you want to think about it more. And I also think you should pinpoint some concrete things because you're saying the kind of, oh, I want to get better at this. What does the benchmark look like? What does the threshold look like, right? Is it, I want to belong to X company by X time, and I want to be earning X amount of money? Make your goals SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. This is not a class on mentorship and strategic goals. So we are going to continue. So we're going to kind of skip this overture part of things, and we're going to get into asking why CCI, and anybody who knows what the acronym CCI stands for can tell me. Not you, Rita. Yes, cultural and creative industries. Cultural comes first, usually because you want to start from the ground up. That's kind of the, thinking behind it, right? And then we're asking the question, or we're answering the question, why data? Why data is so important? And you all spoke a little bit about data, did you? Did I miss that? Did you all speak about data a little bit? Somebody said something about data. It was you? It was you. It was you. Okay. So data is really, really critical, and it's something we need to focus on, and it's something that I would encourage this team especially to focus on, right? Because especially if you're running an incubator, you want to be pulling that data and using how you collect data as a foundation and a framework for building not only your enterprise, but encouraging the building, building in other spaces as well, right? Because you always want to think about standardizing data within, a domain, and then you want to think about what is the international standard that you also want to align with. But if there are variances, if there are, differences, you account for those differences as well, because this is Cayman, it has a very specific culture, a very specific context, and you always want to be cognizant of that, right? So let's begin. data. Can y'all see? I feel like I'm struggling to see this morning. Okay, so internationally, the cultural and creative industries contributes 3.1% of global GDP. Now, folks, that is actually really high, right? When you look at other industries, they're fairly comparable, if not under, right? Because there's so many industries in the world. So if you think 3.1 sounds small, it isn't actually small, it's really high. And that is $2.25 trillion, right? And that was 3 years ago. And bearing in mind that we cannot fully account for the cultural and creative industries because so much of it is informal work that is not actually giving the full picture, right? We know that, based on what we can count or have counted, that it's generated over 30 million jobs worldwide, more than the automotive industry. And we all drive cars, if not two, right? So in Europe, Japan, and the US combined, guys, that's huge. We are sitting on a gold mine. Yeah, we're sitting on a gold mine, and you all need to be able to know those figures and tout those figures when you're speaking to others about your industry, all right? 48% of the creative industry workers are women. That's also a significant factor, right? And I'm sure that most of that is not even counted. We haven't accounted for what is real in this regard. Many creatives are young. So over 40% of workers in the CCI are under 30 in some regions. So we're talking about the cross-section with youth as well and labor, right? And then global trade in creative goods and services reached 1.1 trillion in 2020, despite the pandemic. And we know that the pandemic shut so many things down, right? Employment, the creative economy, which includes gaming, streaming, social media content creation, is the fastest growing segment of CCI. So to our enterprise folks, that's really critical, right? Because you're dealing in tech. Creative digital exports grew by 9% annually between 2002 and 2020. So not only are we huge, but we are growing exponentially. So UNESCO says 3% of the global GDP accounts for creative economy, 2250 billion US dollars generated by the cultural and creative industries annually. So this is it in a snapshot, right? If you wanted to quote some things. 30 million people employed by the cultural sector worldwide. If you want to look for more data, here are some of the spaces that you need to be looking. UNCTAD, they had produced a book called The Creative Economy Outlook. And interestingly, some countries close to us, my country, Trinidad, is counted in one of these, as you'll see in the next slide. So even though you may not be represented in some of this data, you can at least cite something that is close by, right, in your vicinity, in your region, as a way to kind of say, hey, this is what is possible, because another small island has done it. World creative goods export by product groups. So this is interesting as well, because we need to think about what are we focusing in on in terms of growing aspects of the industry and what are the possibilities. So this accounts for visual arts, performing arts, arts and crafts, audiovisuals, new media, publishing, and design. So what is CCI? So as basic as it seems, there's a lot of there's not a unified approach to the definition of culture and creative industries oftentimes, or even to culture, right? And so defining which approach you're using is really critical as a starting point when you're doing your work. So if you're using the UNESCO definition is sectors of organized activity whose principal purpose is the production or reproduction, promotion, distribution, and or commercialization, very important because we're talking about an industry of goods, services, and activities of a cultural, artistic, or heritage-related nature. So again, it sounds basic, but as our students here would know, when you start an academic paper, you're going to start with the definition, right? It's no different here, because if we don't have a standard definition that we're working with, we are all over the place. And if you want to start with this, but you want to then do a kind of, this is our foundation, but we also include X, you go in that in that way, right? But you have to have a common place of understanding. All right, so what is CCI when we break it down in terms of subsectors? And these are called subsectors. So when we refer to this later on, you'll know what we're talking about. Museums, environmental heritage, libraries and archives, literature and print media, performing arts, design, broadcasting, electronic. You could just take a picture. This is UNESCO again. Music, composition and publishing, visual arts and craft, fashion, cultural goods, manufacturing and sales. Sometimes those are things that are not, you're not thinking about. And supporting activities, right? So marketing is really an important part of the creative industries that we often leave out. Sometimes it's represented differently in like concentric circles, and as the circles go out, you have like the core cultural industries, creative industries, and then you have kind of the peripheral or, you know, supporting activities and so on. Again, this is really important in everything we do, and this, you know, someone contested this yesterday. We should identify our areas of focus and determine, you know, okay, these are our priority areas. Maybe we have secondary priority areas, right? But, or maybe we're gonna fund everything, but you have a higher likelihood of funding if you're in these top 5 areas that we choose to focus on. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and why we take that approach, okay? Don't look confused, Ashley, it's gonna come out. All right, so frameworks. So, okay, so you see here all of the areas that are often considered creative and cultural industries. You see circus here, right? And software, right? And if you look closely in that chart right there, in the list right there, you see Trinidad and Tobago listed. You'll see that? All right. Okay, so the value chain. I wish I could expand this a little bit, but I can't. The value chain is a really, really important concept that we work with in the creative industries. And it looks at essentially the processes or the structure of the industry. So it's kind of the two conflated. It looks at the process. So you start, for example, with production, then you go to, or you may start with research and design, sorry, and then you go to creation, and then you go to production, distribution, consumption, right? So that's your basic value chain. But then there are supporting activities, which includes research and innovation, education, human resource management, something that we often leave out. If we don't have those supporting activities, the processes can't happen, right? So they are as essential as the processes. When we talk about designing for the creative industries, we design along the value chain. Because if we don't do that, what we do is we do research and design and then we leave everybody stranded and they don't know what to do with the product thereafter, right? Because there's no system, there's no process, there's no structure to take them into. So good design should always be thinking along the value chain and not just one aspect. Or if you're only doing one aspect, what connections and networks have you created around you so that persons coming out of your incubator know, okay, this is the next step I can take, right? The pipeline is really, really critical. So I talk about developing a grant program as opposed to a grant scheme. And this is what I call an artscape, right? It is my own, personal branding of what I've developed as a grant ecosystem. But it is tested and it has worked and it continues to work. So essentially, what we're looking at doing is thinking about this value chain proposition and designing with that in mind, right? But you're also building in all of the considerations in a strategic and systematic way. So you have things like tech considerations, heritage considerations, equity considerations, gender considerations, right? And you want to think about all of these things at the same time, but you can't have it jumbled up. So you have to have a system, right? That's what an ecosystem is. All the parts working together meaningfully. So how have I done this? I start by establishing core pillars. And those core pillars are 3 core ideas or values or philosophies that are meaningful in your particular context. So if you want to emphasize dynamism, It's not, I wouldn't necessarily put that as a pillar, but I'm just calling it, right? Or if you want to emphasize innovation, or if you want to emphasize mentorship, right? Because it's something that's really lacking in your environment and you're losing a lot of icons and whatever the case is, or you have a lot of young people and that's always needed. So you come up with these core pillars, and you shouldn't have more than 4, I would say. So 3 to 4 core pillars. And under those core pillars, you build things like criteria for your grant scheme, right? So you have the criteria for funding based on the pillars, and then you identify the priority subsectors. So I asked yesterday, why do you think we would want to have priority subsectors and not fund everything? Do you all have any suggestions? Why would we have priority? Why would we select priority subsectors and not just approach funding and fund everything, any subsector? Any thoughts? Say again? Funds are limited. Yeah, exactly. Funds are limited. That's one great reason. Right. So literature may support that, or data may support that, these areas are the core areas that can earn a lot of income for the region or for the country or something like that. And so therefore, you want to focus on those first because you have to choose like some low-hanging fruit, get some wins, and then go from there. So that's one reason. Somebody else had, yeah?
It also sort of sets a standard within each area.
Absolutely. It sets some standards in that particular area, which we can then map off of. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah, I see you like wanting to say something, Yanni. Go ahead. Thinking about it. Processing. Okay. All right. So there's some other reasons, but y'all gave some of the core reasons why we would choose priority subsectors, right? The literature supports that there are certain sectors in the region that are more, that have higher income earning capacity, or that have better structures in place so that they can earn more. And so oftentimes we may select some of those as priority subsectors because, again, we need the wins. We need the income to come in. And that can help to support the other industries or the other subsectors that are not as lucrative at the moment, right? So portfolio objectives. All of these things that we have above there, core pillars and criteria, are actually going to add to transparency in our grant process making, right? Because we have shared with you, this is the basis upon which we are judging your submission. We have these core values. We have these criteria that we're using to judge your submission. And you may not know the details in terms of how we weight the criteria, but at least you know the criteria, right? And then we have priority subsectors. So you're going to have a better chance of getting a grant if you are within all of those things. So then why portfolio objectives, and what are those? Your portfolio is the entire group of grants that you choose to support, right? So you may say you're giving 10 grants of $10,000 in this first grant cycle. And you have to think about your own portfolio and what you are trying to achieve strategically in selecting those grants. Because it's not that this one grant is going to achieve all your goals, but the portfolio of grants that you select should achieve all your goals and match your criteria overall. So for example, in year 1 of your portfolio, you may say, okay, I want to fund established projects, right? That take on mentees or apprentices, right? Because that's one way of growing the industry. And you have a lot of youth. You can't bring up the youth and have, there's nobody on top of them to guide them. And so established projects, that's the first part. Those projects should have as a criteria a mentorship component. And then I'm not a high risk portfolio. I am a high risk portfolio, right? I want dynamic. So for a tech project, for a tech company, you might have a high risk appetite, right? Because that's the nature of tech. Okay. And through an incubator, if you're doing an incubator and giving grants at the end of that, you know that you've trained them so that they have a higher chance, even if they're high risk, of gaining success, because there's a whole process involved. So you may determine, okay, yes, we want some high risk projects, but we also want some stable projects that are going to definitely turn out what we want them to turn out in the short space of time. So you define the objectives for your portfolio for that year, and you define them along a 3-year trajectory, to show how your portfolio is going to grow based on what you select as a grantee pool for each year. Does that make sense to you all? Do you all have any questions? Thoughts on that so far? No? Okay, so the creative stages of development, I mentioned it while I was talking, have to do with whether you're emerging, established, export ready, or nascent. Why do we categorize creatives in this way? Because it helps us to understand where they are, what they need to get to the next level, and what their timeline should look like for that growth trajectory. So emerging would generally be young, or you've just come into the industry. You may not be young, but maybe it's the first time you're trying this hard thing out, right? So you're an emerging practitioner who's maybe practiced for under 2 years. You should at least have 1 course under your belt. You should at least have a small portfolio. If you're in high school, maybe won an award. But if you're an older person, you've at least, exhibited at a show, right? That might be what emerging looks like. Established, you've been practicing for 3 to 5 years, et cetera, et cetera. So you get the point between emerging, established, and export ready. A nascent project may be one that is a startup, right? But it's being executed by experienced practitioners. So it's not emerging from the point of view that they're new and the project is new. Nascent is when the project is new, but the practitioners aren't new. Does that make sense to you all? Okay. So those qualifications are really, really important because we need to know who we are talking about and how we're moving them from one stage to the other. And then the community of practice is exactly what we have in this room. How do we come together to form a networked community of engagement? So how does one entity or institution partner with the other so that together we create a holistic picture or holistic growth plan for the industry in the country? And it works well with CNCF and enterprise that we have here, right? Because one is focused on tech, the other definitely isn't, right? And both are necessary. So together, if we form that framework, we can advance the industry strategically, right? But we should also be using the same kinds of benchmarks, the same kinds of data points, etc., so that when we come together and we present our case to a larger funder or to the government, we have a unified project plan to show them about the industry. So under the community of practice, you generate knowledge resources. So similar to what Rita is talking about the educational resources that are coming out of CNCF and the project that you were speaking of, Megan. You have incubators, enterprise was speaking about that. And we have what we call, I forgot to talk about this yesterday, impact amplification mechanisms. When I give a grant to someone, I expect them to give it back. And I don't mean give back the grant. I mean pay it forward. Offer something to the community based on the project or product that you have created that can be of worth and can teach the rest of the community something. So it's a knowledge resource, essentially, that each grantee produces for the larger community. What does that help? Even though it's only one person who got the grant, it has larger and broader impact and can help to slowly grow the industry across the board. It's a good practice because it also helps people just very simply not to be so selfish, right? It sounds basic, but folks, it is real. And then stakeholder engagement. This is also really, really important in terms of your grant ecosystem. It's part of the transparency aspect of things, but it's also part of brokering trust. Trust is something that is not in great supply oftentimes in our industry, in the region. I'm certain that you all experience it here as well, right? It's the same in the rest of the region, right? And so what happens in the region that I can speak of is that policymakers don't trust the artists, and artists don't trust the policymakers, and they don't speak the same language, they have different jargon, etc. How do you broker that trust, right? That's where your stakeholder engagement plan comes in. And it is really, really critical to have planned feedback loops, events, etc., that make up an entire plan of how you engage and build trust with your clientele. Does that make sense? Right. Then we have the enabling environments and partnership models. So this is where we develop resource mobilization strategies based on the grant program design and based on partnership models. I see partnership as part of resource mobilization because there are different kinds of resources. Money is not the only resource we need in this ball game, right? We need human resources, we need venues, and each person has a part of the puzzle. So how can we come together so that we don't need as much financial resources to actually get the job done because everybody's contributing something in that regard? And in that regard, you can develop a partnership model. So when I was at the bank, I developed one that included donor partners. Those are bringing the money, yes, but you also form a relationship with them. Knowledge partners, that might be universities and so on. Accelerator or incubator partners who we actually host incubators with. So they do one aspect, we do one aspect. It means that we can train more people, right? We had, I think, space partners, so venues, etc. And you can go on and on. You determine what your organization needs and develop your partnership model based on that. And then you have the grant scheme. So in a grant scheme by itself, this is all you're going to have. Like your different types of grants, you give them out, you get a map, you get some data, and you move it along. What I've presented to you is much more robust and in-depth than just the grant schemes, right? I don't know, something is wrong with the slides here, it goes backward. Okay, so priority subsectors. The research in the Caribbean has identified certain priority subsectors for the region based on, things like copyright, income, and so on. So they have come up with music, audiovisual, fashion and contemporary designs, festivals and carnivals, literary and publishing, and what's not included here, as well as visual arts. These are the highest potential sectors in the region based on what is currently happening. You may decide that these are not the priority subsectors for you based on your Caymanian context, but it's something that you should determine. And then you determine, well, do I want to do 2 priority subsectors that align with the region and 2 low performing subsectors because I want to pull those up and they have lots of potential in Cayman. You determine what your portfolio looks like and find the justification for why, because that also brokers trust with your creatives, right? They need to understand why you're doing what you're doing so that they can get on board with it. If they just see, oh, I've chosen these priority subsectors and they're not there, they're going to be looking at you like, really? Really now? Right? So that's really, really, it's really, really critical to justify your choices. So we ask the question, aren't they all important? Absolutely. Do they all have the same potential? Not always. So you have to capture the data. You have to build strategically and have your proof of concepts. Oh, hello. I'm coming for you after, okay? Develop the credibility. So selecting subsectors where you can develop some credibility, because sometimes you choose a subsector because you know the players and the players are reliable. Folks, you cannot underestimate how important that is. If you have a subsector where you call somebody to perform and they don't show up, or they come late, or they're just not professional, or whatever the case is, but you have another subsector where maybe they're not quite as creative, but they are reliable, you will get them there, you could train them and upskill them and whatnot, maybe it's credibility you need to build, right? So you have to think about all these little nuances in the process. Strategic positioning. Again, it's about the strategic positioning for growth. Don't move her. Sorry, so you have a little weakness there, right? Um, Develop your unique selling proposition based on your core strengths. So you have the stage development of your project, and then allocate your resources effectively based on that. All right, so this little exercise is for you all to think about what are or what could be your priority subsectors for Cayman. And across entities, do you all share the same interest in growing specific subsectors? Or do you want to focus on different subsectors? And that helps make up the whole puzzle, right? So, for example, CNCF could decide, you know what, I want to focus on theater and dance. And enterprise could decide, okay, I'm going to focus on design and architecture and fashion or film and media, right? So nobody's left out in that way, right? You focus on a couple and the other focus on a couple. And then you'll come together to have the data points that are common so that when you are looking at the growth of this sector, you can look at it holistically and you're already on the same page. So a little exercise for you all. On this table, what two subsectors would you focus on enterprise, and what two subsectors would you focus on at CNCF, and why? And on this table, I want you to think about the cross-cutting values that you would want to see for whatever they choose. Right? The cross-cutting values are things like equity and inclusion, gender, youth, rural creatives. Do you want to look at transversal areas such as climate, education, or agriculture, urban planning? Do you want to focus on collaboration and networks from regional and global partnerships? So think about what you want your cross-cutting values to be and why. You have to justify it from a Caymanian perspective. Yep, so you're doing the two, and you're doing the cross-cutting values. No? You have 10 minutes. Okay, you'll have 2 more minutes, and then I want to see. Let's have you put them on the using markers. Put them on the flip chart, and I'd like you all to write them on the flip chart and be prepared to speak about them and why. Yeah. What? Yeah, write it. Yes.
Is it correct that you do this in the right area? Is the part of the area?
You. Well, I want to know why you chose that area. So I want to say something about the media part. Usually, media goes along with something else. It isn't. It's when you're looking at it from a creative industry standpoint. For grants, you usually give it for like film and media, or you can maybe come up with your own grouping, heritage and media, right? If you're looking at an innovation pillar, for example, and you want to see the stimulation of heritage in new ways, you may create a category that's heritage and media. But media and digital can also work as a criteria so that all your applicants should be encouraged to do something that involves media and digital. Does that make sense? So it often isn't a standalone category. You're also supposed to have four.
Yeah, no, I will. I would, since I'm trying to get specific, I can work on it. What's your rationale? Positioning of pickup in P1 and how we grants how yeah, why do you select it? Because leadership shapes the culture and speaking for whether it's legal, shift your, I think, cultural views, like within the community. That's big. Okay, great. Video too. Because you're going to speak on something like no, I'm trying to explain why something's so work. Like, so you know, it's so personal. It's like why I always choose this class. You know, and I can always justify it. So sometimes you need something else to justify it. Say it question. Why do you choose to say like okay, so I have some priorities sometimes.
I would have to say that, I mean, this is probably not but it's because one of the businesses we recognize or recognize that theater has benefits to the Asian communities, right? But in Vietnam, the theaters we don't have theater that is local media theater, that's local theater. Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, but why is that important? Theaters is not everywhere.
Well, that's
So why is that?
community is more, that's closer to theater that have a better background in research into the lines of information. But for me, if I was using it as a priority, it would be because it is recognized as beneficial to patients, and therefore we should create spaces where we can allow people to benefit our nation. That's one of the reasons. I mean, it's very broad, and I don't know enough. Writing the teacher,
Right, our youth is, they understood that they got inspired, so they actually to run to the next. And, we have excellent theater practitioners who are accessing level to be able to teach this. To bring it in terms of some more kind of art class.
Yes. Yes. So we have
And so it's very much higher than this and more how to take that and that helps us.
Right. But how about you?
It's not in relation to this, not because of why. But we can try to.
Absolutely, right. Yeah. But there's change of views, there is, yeah.
And that's what this means.
So. You want to focus on process of
So we want more people looking at us how to do that.
it's not as great, right? You don't need to go to the either where Kimani heritage or Kimani identity question because you have so much influx of so many different nationalities coming in, and the question of who is Kimani is of importance. And it's like that what we were talking about yesterday, where at age 18 you have to apply to for Kimani. Yeah, knowledge, whatever. Even though you were born here, that's context. You know what I'm saying? That's a cultural context. That's basically evidence of what's happening here. That's what you need to justify. Right? Or if you're doing it, I mean, and I know I'm not doing it, right? But if you're doing like you're doing tech, why is tech particularly relevant to Kima? Why can't Kima not particularly relevant to tech? Right? So tech is a capital tech. So one justification is a capital tech is usually workforce. And we can help to bridge that gap, right? Through the incubator. Because maybe the different training for tech, we need 2 years of training skills before we high level. cyber, whatever, right? As opposed to something actually like 5 to 10 years straight before you think about it. You know what I mean? So those are some of the justifications that you use for selection of different areas. Creating that is a goal, something that is very useful for the region because generally speaking, you can trade for a year or two and you can have a single product. That happens on something like that, for example. Right? So you want to select that topic if people would say, oh, we want to trade the next and create a restaurant for this year because of justification, that's all that's essential, and it's cultural context, right? So that's what I want to hear from you all to there. So, maybe you want to combine heritage and place, and if it's a leads community heritage, maybe you want to be unique in that regard. You know, so come up with something that can be unique to human in this community of constructs, right? Right, you may of aromatics, processing values.
When we're talking about the albums that they would see, like for instance, how this understanding of their heritage and culture, sustainability, we feel like with the rapid development, like we're talking about diverse nationalities and how can we make it sustainable for people to grow in the great histories, how can we achieve that when we have this understanding of their heritage and culture, how to make it sustainable for them if there's small change and stuff.
I like that approach. It's like a different approach in terms of how we usually try to see. So that's nice.
Well, because I really like to know that it's not just, she recognizes it's not just climate, it's social, economic sustainability, and she's being willing to, we could really do sustainability through all lenses there, through inclusion and watershed and social levels.
Nice.
So do you know about me?
Yeah, I guess that this is a workshop as well as some feedback into the plan. So this is not just a. Don't look like that. Don't look like what? Like, you're like, oh, I'm just trying to figure that out. No, not like that. I don't know. You know what it is now? It's also how I want to agree. You know how many else I agree? That's not so hard, so I don't like it. Yeah, I do, but I don't want to concentrate. And I'm also not even concerned about what I think. Okay, so let's, all right, so I'm gonna hear that by the end of it because
This has to be your choice. I mean, I can make recommendations, but this is really about your choice. All right, so the weaknesses of the industry, right? I'm going to share what we call a fishbone diagram, which shows the weaknesses, and it's something I did while I was at the back. And this is based on the literature, essentially, right? So this is what we were just talking about. What are the core strengths of Cayman CI? Is it cultural heritage? Is it flagship festivals? Is it education and training? Is it tourism, right? And you would want to think about some of those in terms of selecting your priority subsectors. You may want to choose 2 strengths, as I said, and 2 weaknesses so that you bring up the weaknesses. The fishbone diagram. I'm sure many of these things pertain to Cayman as well, but this is regional. So lack of access to funding is like the main fishbone, right? Because it is prevalent everywhere. But there are also things like no succession forecasting, right? How many of you know people who have been in the positions that they're in forever and ever, amen, and they don't want to move. They don't let any youth into the positions. The organizations remain static, and we just don't evolve. Yeah? Okay. No succession planning. It's a very personal thing. Who are you training to take your job, and where are you going to next? That's the question I ask myself. Lack of data and market intelligence, right? We spoke about that. Top-down policy approach. So are we allowing, only the policymakers to make policy, or are we really factoring in what the community is saying? Geographic dispersal, and this is across the region, of course, we are an archipelago. Weak advocacy. And so let me go back to this geographic dispersal part a bit. It is a problem. And as a region, we are so small comparatively that it is hard for us to get advantages of scale, right? So it is really, really critical for us to collaborate within the region. It's not an if or but or why. It's a need, folks, right? We are small. And that means that locally, you have to collaborate with your partners on the ground and also partner regionally, right? To build critical mass. Right, brain drain. How many of you know people who don't come back? So, I mean, I will admit that I'm part of the brain drain problem, right? Like I go away, I live in the US at present, but I do all my work for the region, right? I'm committed to my region. I want to see my region grow. It just so happens that I studied abroad and I got married abroad. So how are you, even if there's a brain drain, how are you creating what we call brain circulation, right? Which is, yes, people may be living abroad, but how are you still bringing the resources back to the region? Lack of coordination is another key concern. And then limited PPP, which is public-private partnership. How are you partnering with, vertically, horizontally, et cetera, with not only other CCI organizations, but also other sectors that can really support your organization. Low clustering, that means, again, relationships between entities that are really forged and sound. Low collaboration. Weak directory linkages. So that's in terms of supply. Inadequate training and insufficient incubators and accelerators. Well, thank you to Enterprise for having a consistent one. Weak business models, weak M&E frameworks. M&E is monitoring and evaluation. Limited marketing and distribution networks, and low access to market integration platforms. We do not own our market integration platforms. We use those of others, Spotify, Netflix, etc. Right? Do we have regional ones that we are participating in? This means that we do not own our content. Oftentimes, sometimes they take ownership of the content. If not, they own the data behind the content. So we don't know how our content is actually performing. And that's a big problem because data is a huge income earner, folks, huge. So we're just giving away all our power, ritually. Weak industrial, trade, and economic policies, and this includes, these are the systems. So this is the entire ecosystem of lack that you're seeing here, right? Not a pretty thing to really look at, but when you're developing a program, you should be able to identify which of these things you are actually targeting and improving. And that helps with your strategic positioning in the entire kind of CI framework that you need to be able to speak about, right? So understanding the weaknesses in your context and determine which ones are your priority and secondary priorities and why. Brainstorm your overarching strategy based on TOWs, threats, opportunities, weaknesses, and strengths. Make sure that your strategy is action-oriented, strategic pairing and alignment, and dynamic, and this becomes your rationale. So when you use the TOWs model, there are these pairings that allow you to create your strategy. So the first one is weaknesses and opportunities. So we see the weaknesses as suppliers, surroundings, skills, systems, and what are our opportunities that are matched to that, and how do we then take those two and combine them to create the strategic approach that we are going to have. But in terms of Cayman, we know that there's a paucity of data and limited mapping. right? And so in the strategy that we're developing, we're starting with mapping, because if we don't map, if we don't know what exists, how are we going to grow? How are we going to grow it strategically, right? The absence of structured mapping of key stakeholders, funding sources, infrastructure gaps makes strategic planning very difficult. Lack of understanding of the creative industries, policymakers, government agencies, and private sector stakeholders have a limited awareness of the economic value and potential of the creative industries. The creative sector is often excluded from broader economic development strategies, and as you know, it should not be, right? CI can be a cross-cutting theme just like gender, and it's something that I've always advocated for. But the opportunities are that there is some appetite for growth and strategic alignment, but we need to really capitalize on it. And there's a willingness to engage public-private partnerships. Yes, Yanni? CCI is a cross-cutting theme. Then we have the SO strategy. So that should be strengths on the side there, sorry. Determined and talented creatives who consistently produce, right, Ashley? Right? You're consistently producing, right? Right. Okay. Creators with strong presence on social media and loyal local audiences, we hope, right? Creatives who try to network and collaborate locally and with foreign counterparts. So oftentimes our creatives are the strength of the whole system, right? But we have to be able to buoy them up a little bit. And then the opportunities are what you all say that you're doing already: AR, IR, NFTs, willingness to collaborate, online co-production, new focus on DEI. That is kind of dying now, but you know, it remains true in some spheres. Acceptance of online exchange, which lowers the cost of doing business for entrepreneurs. That's really important. And creative and online hybrid events. And then cryptocurrency, there are also some questions on that. So I wouldn't really encourage you all to kind of jump feet first into that if you're not already there. But yeah. Y'all do cryptocurrency? Well, they're already there, so yeah. Right, and let's see, SO strategy. Right, and then the SO strategy, which should be strengths and opportunities, you'll see here as well. So obviously there are overlaps between these different things, but essentially then you use this to create your strategy, right? You're like pairing them, analyzing how they work together to build upon it. And then, so we're just going to introduce the program here. We're not going to go into depth, but the program that we're developing is a thematic progression across 5 years, from mapping to mobility, a commitment to documentation and legacy building, a drive toward integration of fragmented frameworks and resources in the service of the development of arts and culture, a deep concern for the socio-economic well-being of arts practitioners and communities, and a bold push toward establishing a Caymanian arts and culture brand. How many would like to be a part of that? Okay, so I see then there's some alignment in what we want to do, right? So how are we going to come together to do it? So these are the pillars that we have proposed, and that is for you all to kind of dig deep and see if it really aligns with where you think you are. And I love what you all came up with in terms of social sustainability, and maybe that's something we can refine in the pillars, right? But I also feel as though the status of the artist speaks to social sustainability as well. So maybe in the explanation of the status of the artist is where the social sustainability piece could come in, right? Exchange and movement, we want to be able to maybe move between the Cayman Islands, right? The different islands, but also move within the region and further abroad. And then innovation and sustainability on that end is pretty self-evident. That's our 5-year program, which we're building, and we're not going to go too in-depth into. But that's where we end. Just to say that alongside our plan, we have a rememory function, which allows for us to always revisit how we're building, what we're building, and why we're building it, to ensure that it remains true to who we want to be and who we're becoming. Yeah. All right. Would love your feedback or any thoughts as we wrap up today. right. Yes, Ashley, she has a question.
I think it's just really cool because I feel like you provided a language to talk about like from a high level, just yeah, I guess like for me to say, I'll always mention it to you when my goals are, you know, for year in this setting, and I'm looking at it from that perspective. But like my goal within in the theater, or not in the theater, but storytelling, because I like my own production as well. But you created a language around and just like a system around how to achieve the goals of what literally we do as art makers and as creators, and that's so cool. I've never seen it sort of written out in that way. Like these things make sense, and I'm like, oh yeah, that, you know, or conversation we didn't talk as much about commercialization and like, but the business side of things. So I just been like.
Well, all these things precede commercialization. That's the important part, right? Like you have to understand a lot of this to really bring things to market in an effective way.
Right. Well, and for me, because like I am also based out of the US as well as a creator, and like I think one of the things that I talk often with my coworkers is just the difference of like being somewhere where there's an established structure, there is an established industry around it, and then coming back here and seeing the opportunity. I know that I often feel frustrated by it.
Yeah.
Working within that, but I do see outside of like my care and invested interest in as a humanity in our community. I also see the opportunity in what we can do and in different things that might be lacking in the in other industries that are more
developed
and have exploitative practices or whatever. So this was just really cool.
Cool. Thank you. Any thoughts on the strategic plan and what y'all would do differently? Because y'all are young people, maybe y'all want something different. Mm-hmm. A fragmented framework. We all use different frameworks. We all use a different understanding. We need to come to a common place of understanding and doing things in the same way. And that it's not in an effort to make things like monochromatic, you know what I mean? Like boring. It's in an effort to build, because it's like, think about it like the foundation of a house. You must have a strong foundation, and there's a rhythm, there's a pattern to that foundation, there's a structure. If we don't have that structure, you can't build on top of that. We're trying to get to the top without creating the structure, without creating a foundation.
And we'd like to see institutions throughout
a similar framework and a similar way of doing things. So one of the things that I put into CNCF is how we map projects, or how we build projects, by components, then by activities, etc. They've kept that framework, right? I learned that framework from IDB. So it means that IDB is using the same framework as CNCF now. And then I've also taught it to CCF, the Caribbean Culture Fund. So they're now also using the same framework. The more we use the same framework, it becomes familiar to everyone. Every project that you develop looks like that. So you don't have to start from scratch every time you develop a project, because you already know the framework, right? So it becomes easier to do. It becomes, familiar, and it becomes structurally sound.
So for me, you're talking about bringing together fragmented frameworks. For me, that means that exposure within our community, from my perspective, that means exposure to this kind of information to all of our thinking and practicing bodies, so that they are then using deeper urban strategy to drive their arts processes. That's what happens for me, so that we're not doing the same. They're not doing no radar guide, et cetera. They are using that. They are making sure they're using strategies, potentially using others. That's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and you're also potentially using similar types of platforms to collect data, similar data points, etc. So when you say with your incubator, oh, we've trained, 50 young creatives, their ages X to X, you're using the same groupings, which is 16 to 21, so that is consistent across simple things like that, so that when you come together, you can say, across institutions, we have trained 200 young people between 16 to 21 in these different areas across the institutions, right? That's how it helps you to speak about, actual progress in a meaningful way. If you don't have that systematized and you're using 16 to 21 and you're using 16 to 24, where does that, it starts to get imbalanced, right? Because then the next grouping is 25 to 29 or 25, you know what I mean? It starts to go all over the place. So when you start to get some really just simple things on the same page, then you're able to progress much more seamlessly. And then what platforms are y'all using? What platform do y'all use to process grants, or do y'all use Submittable? Do y'all use Google Forms? What do y'all use? Use what? For grants? Okay. Interesting. Right, I understand. So that's just part of your larger, you use HubSpot for other things, and this is one of the things. What do you use for, like, processing grant applications? What platform? Like when they submit an application to you?
Well, we actually have one coalition that has any grant option with.
No, but the application forms to get into the incubator, what do y'all use?
Yeah, sorry. We just have an application form.
Through SurveyMonkey. Interesting.
Do you have specific ones?
Submittable. Yeah, but it should be pulling data. That is one of your key data collecting points. Applications. You're gonna have many more applications, and you're gonna have people who you actually give a grant. But you can get a lot of data when you get an application form. So you should be tracking that. You should have it all in one place, and you should have it on a platform that's doing that work for you. Can what? Forms what? I don't know. I'm not familiar with FormStack. FormStack.
Yeah. You can create forms and you can pull the data from each form and put it in. But you can structure the forms in a way that, depending on what you want to gather, because later the platform will allow you to pull specific data from forms and put them in spreadsheets or put them in graphs or put them in things.
But okay, so FormStack allows the data collection in that regard. What about the review process?
So, FormStack, I don't know if FormStack can do that, but I don't know, yeah. Also, we can explore the full potential of the platform. So, there are different tiers of the platform that allows you to do different things.
Right.
And right now we're on basic plan that only allows for basic detection. So yeah, so we can say, for instance, if you have some how many boys versus girls,
Right.
and you can track ages, you can track all of that information in the form, and we can export that to a sheet that can be
CSV.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
but yeah, we have to explore, as I said, there are other tiers to the platform that we have to explore, probably for that or justice.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. All right, folks. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for your work, and don't forget at the very. Oh, you have it for me. Yeah, post-it notes. Okay. Please share those post-it notes with me before you leave. Yeah, I want y'all to submit them.